Hermvids with Mr. Hermit. Educational videos about reading and writing. Alright, so I'm going to show you guys a picture of a creature, and then I'm going to relate it to a poetry skill that I'm going to teach you today. So this hideous looking monster is referred to as the Kraken. The Kraken is a mythical giant sea creature that pops up in Pirates of the Caribbean, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It is a man-eating squid, basically. And when authors are naming horrific fictional characters like the Kraken, or the Sasquatch, or King Kong, they pick words and sounds that have a harsh nature to them. Kraken, King Kong, Godzilla. The idea is that all the words that we use have a feeling to them when they're said out loud. Either they're smoother words, they're harsher words, they're more liquid and flowing. If you can master this skill, you're going to add an element to your poetry that when your reader reads what you're writing, it adds another feeling to everything. So let's figure out how to do this. This is something that I learned relatively recently. We kind of take this for granted, the fact that our words sound a certain way and that sound has meaning to it. Poetry is often written with the sound of the words in mind. Whether poetry is read out loud or in the mind of the reader, the words selected by the poet have a distinct sound to them. So when you read it in your mind, you're actually hearing a voice read it. It's very similar to it being read out loud. These sounds can influence the feeling, tone, and meaning of a poem. Here are a few examples. There's a great book called A Poetry Handbook by Mary Oliver that explains all of this, and this is taken directly from it. So I'm sure you guys learned back in kindergarten that there are generally two types of letters, vowels and consonants. Vowels are your A, E, I, O, U's, and the technical definition is they form a perfect sound when uttered alone. The consonant cannot be perfectly uttered till joined to a vowel. For instance, F, you need that eh sound before you say F. But A, E, I, O, U, or oo, or all the other different variations, sometimes W and Y, they can be said independently. They have a smoother, more pure sound to them, and that comes across in poetry. Now, consonants have more of a variety. There are two different main types here. Semivowels, which are closer in sound to the vowels, and mutes. Let's figure out what these terms mean. A semivowel is exactly how it sounds. It sounds similar to a vowel. It can be imperfectly sounded without a vowel. But the idea is that it is more pleasant sounding than the mutes that are going to come later. Examples of semivowels are F, H, J, L, M, N. Notice these letters and sounds all have an extended feeling to them, and they're smoother. R, S, V, W, X, Y, Z. So the X has a different sound when you say it, but you can kind of get the impression that they are softer in sound. C, G. Now, there's a subset called liquids that have an even smoother, fluent feeling to them. L, M, N, R. So they're almost as smooth as a vowel, but not quite. That's why they are a semi-vowel. If you are writing about nature, the beauty of nature, the beauty of love, I recommend you use more semi-vowel sounding words because that'll come across when your reader hears it. The beauty of the language will be clearer. On the flip side of that, you've got mutes, and the word mute itself basically describes what a mute is. It's short, abrupt, it suddenly stops at the end of the breath. K, P, T. These are all examples of mutes because they are not extended like an L or an R or a T. Or I'm sorry, not a T. They have a abrupt sound to them. B, D, K, P, Q, T. It's harsher. K, G, and C, the K part of the C, have the harshest stop, and the B, D, and G, they have a less sudden stop, so they're on the less harsh side. But the K sound, like the Kraken, King Kong, it gives you a harsher sound to it. So if you're describing something that is harsher, like panic or violence or death, you want to use more mutes because that'll make it sound more appropriate. Let's look at an applicable example here. These three examples, hush, please be quiet, and shut up, all have distinctly different feels to them. They mean the same thing, but because of word sounds, we react to them differently if they were said to us. The first phrase, hush, you might use to quiet a little kid. You don't want to disturb them. It's almost like you're putting a little baby to sleep with the shh noise. It's smoother sounding. The second phrase starts off smoothly and it ends with some mutes. And it kind of steps it up a little bit. It's not quite as angry, but it shows you that they kind of mean business. Please be quiet. That quiet ending is the mute part, that T and the Q. So it's a little bit more intense. Now the third is the most intense, as I'm sure you've experienced in your life. Shut up. Those are mute sounds. It's abrupt, and there's anger to it. You would be upset if someone told you to shut up. It's like a slap, basically. And the words have that feeling to them because of the word sounds. Another example. A rock and a stone mean the same thing. But because they sound differently when said out loud, we envision different things. Think of this for a second. Rock. It ends with a mute, that k sound. And we think more of a jagged thing we might find buried in our backyard. Whereas a stone, it starts off with a mute, st, but it ends more fluidly. And that makes me think of something that is more round, like you're skipping stones, as opposed to the rock, which is more jagged. Let's take a look at an example in poetry. Robert Frost is a nature poet who wrote this very famous poem called Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. And we're just going to read the first two stanzas to show you how he uses this in his own work. In this poem, a narrator is stopping with his horse on a long journey, and he's appreciating the snow falling around him in this first stanza. Pay attention to the word sounds here. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. With a few exceptions, that's mostly liquids, semivowels, and vowel sounds. Whose woods, his house, watch his woods fill up with snow. Now there are a few mute sounds. There's the stopping, but it's mostly this more fluid, liquid sound. And the idea is that it's supposed to be a serene snowfall. Now this changes a bit in the next stanza. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. There's all these T sounds. There's the k queer sound. There's the lake sound. These are all mutes. They're harsher. And he is jostled out of his kind of trance from the snow, and he has to think about everything else. He has to think about his horse. He has to think about stopping and how it's going to get dark soon. He creates harshness not only through describing and using words, but also the way the words sound. And I want you guys to do that with your next poem.